This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 265.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramzi Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? I am your host, Ramzi Majaba. What is common? This is looking not nice. No. Fix it later. Hey, what is common between musicians, sports, and sales engineering? Competitiveness, in my opinion. I mean, I didn't wait for you to answer the question, so I answered it on your behalf. But generally speaking, there's a lot of competition, and I'm not talking like when you're a musician. There are different kinds of musicians, and my guest today was a musician, and we're going to talk about that. He worked in an orchestra. He studied like classical music, and I'm not going to say the instrument. I will say it in the show. So we talked about that. We talked about his history, why he got into sales engineering, how he got into sales engineering, and his journey and his path, and he's done multiple different things. But one of the things that we wanted to touch on is I've never talked to anyone in the health industry, as in selling to health workers. And that's what I wanted to talk about. There are many things we can talk about, but this is one industry that I'm not very familiar with that I wanted to chat about. So hopefully you enjoy as much as I did. Thank you, Josh, for coming on, and I will see you after the show. Mr. Price, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
How often do you do this? First podcast. Well,
yeah.
I'm happy to be the first podcast to host you. So, for those who don't know you, and since this is your first podcast, I'm sure there might be more than one.
Sure.
Who are you? What do you do? And where are you now?
Yeah, sure. So I am a sales engineer, or solution engineer, as we call them at Trella Health, down in Tampa, Florida. I kind of got into the healthcare IT space, maybe 7 or 8 years ago now. So not even a full decade under the belt. But ultimately, I'm a person who probably, tripped into a few too many positions along the way. Not necessarily different work opportunities, but just different opportunities in general, whether it's life, things like that, and that kind of thing happens. And so just lucky to be in the position I'm in here at Trella Health, which is, again, that's the company that I work for now and have for the past few years or so. Not necessarily background stuff, but yeah, that's kind of who I am. Just somebody who's kind of been along for the ride a little bit and pushed on places where I feel like I can push a little bit and take my career to the next step. So that's really me, I think. Hopefully that's a good answer.
Nice. That's a very good answer. So I am stalking you a little bit on LinkedIn, just so you know.
Sure.
And I am very curious. Is your bachelor's in music helpful in your IT career?
I would say absolutely. Yeah. It's specifically it's a really good question to ask, right? Because I think school is one of those things, especially when you get to the bachelor's level, not talking necessarily about master's or doctorates, because a lot of folks will kind of enter into the workforce before they decide where they want to do that kind of post-bachelor education. But for me, I think it was one of those things where I knew I wanted to do music. I knew that was where I wanted to go. And it was all I'd known from when you're in high school, middle school, even back to when I was just a little kid and starting out along with that stuff. And so funny enough, kind of in, where my background lies, my father was also a music major who ended up in healthcare IT. And so I didn't know that that's where I was going to end up at all. I thought my path was going to be very different. But I did know that if things went south with the music career, things like that, I knew there were going to be backup options. So long way of answering the question I think it's incredibly helpful because it taught me how to prepare, it taught me how to practice, and it taught me how to perform. which goes back to this idea of sales engineering, solution engineering, going into the demo aspect of things as well. I often think of it as a performance, and I think of practicing and preparing for it in a very similar way. So a lot of that has kind of put me onto that path of sales in general, but then ultimately the solution engineering piece of that too.
Yeah, I can imagine someone being like, I'm looking again on your LinkedIn, you're part of the you were part of the Northwest Florida Symphony Orchestra, right? Like for some reason, I imagined that to be a stressful gig. Like, am I right in thinking that, or did you not find it stressful?
I found most parts of the music world very stressful because judgment comes from all places. If you're not doing the right things, if you're not playing the right way, you have your peers around you that are in the orchestra with you, and they often, they're competing against you in a lot of ways. I think when you're in this college atmosphere, everybody's trying to be the best, and so there's a lot of judgment that comes there. It comes from directors who are trying to emulate what a might have written a piece of music. And it comes from, I think, just, when you look at the greater world in general, and you look at a lot of arts degrees and things like that, a lot of folks wonder why somebody would enter into that world. So I think there was a lot of pressure from that side of it to, it's just not a judgment-free zone. And that's one of the things I talk about too. And you probably feel this way, Ramsey, when you're thinking about demoing. I think of it like, and I use this analogy a lot, but like, you're like a movie director or a chef, and you're going and you're putting this art out into the world. And then the sales reps that are working with you, your sales VPs that are working with you, they come back with a million different critiques, and you might have thought you put like the best piece of art out there. But somebody's always got something to say. I don't know if that rings true for you.
It does. I mean, I think of the demo process. I mean, Brian Geary, he a former guest, he's also a consultant for sales engineers. He told me like creating a demo is like a story. You have to script, like it's like a storytelling. So it's a playwright or something. You have to script it, and then you have to direct it, and then you have to act it. So you put your heart and soul in it, and then someone doesn't like it. It's like, oh, you didn't say that thing, or so. Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I never. So I know you just said that it's very competitive. I always thought like sports is competitive. Never thought music was competitive, and I always felt like competition. A good SE is very competitive as well.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a good thing. It got you prepared for that. I'm just like, how did you transition from being a musician, which you probably still are a musician, and now you're a sales engineer leader? What was the path like, and what made you have the choice of starting down that path?
Yeah, being candid with you, and whoever chooses to listen to this podcast here, I think ultimately I knew when my time was through with music. I had graduated from Florida State University, and I love my professor there. His name is Jeff Kiesecker. He's a bassoon professor. I was a professional or a amateur bassoonist, I guess. And then ultimately made my way to the New England Conservatory up there. And at the end of my first year in getting my master's, I realized that I'd taken on a fair amount of student debt, and I just didn't feel like I was progressing in the way that I should be for the amount of money that I was spending. So at the end of the year, I'd asked my professor, I said, is this something I feel you think I should continue in? Because I think I've made the decision that I'm already out. And he kind of agreed with me. And so we part amicably, but ultimately I went back home and then kind of had to decide what the heck I was going to do. And I was applying for any and every job that was out there. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, she had moved back to Tampa. She was from Tampa originally. And so at that point, I made the decision that I wanted to kind of move down to Tampa with her. I was in Atlanta at the time. And Atlanta is obviously a hub spot for, healthcare IT, but ultimately found a job at a company called Greenway Health down there, which sells EHRs and EMRs to ambulatory physicians for the most part. So smaller practices where, you might walk into your primary care office. That's probably more of where we were selling to, other than like a major hospital system or something like that. And I knew nothing about sales, but I'd had a few opportunities. I kind of went in on the ground floor at an entry level position there. We had to do presentations and the whole rigmarole to try and get a sales job. And ultimately, I'd done the same thing that I did with my music, and I just prepared in a very similar way. A lot of practice, a lot of preparation went into that, and got the job. And then 2 months later, ironically, they'd had one of the account executives just walked out one day, left his badge on his desk, and they needed somebody to fill in right away. And so I took on that sales job for 3 years. I was not great at it. I think a lot of SEs would like to think they're great salespeople, and I've had the experience now to know that I was not the best at sales in general. I struggled with a few things, but more importantly, I was young and I didn't quite know how to have some of those harder conversations around expectations and close dates and negotiation and things like that. And so I think I put off a lot of that stuff. And then, eventually after 3 years of kind of doing that, being in the middle of the pack, I was somebody who very much thrived on being the best. And that's the experience I just had through my life, through music. And so ultimately I knew that I wanted to go into do something else. I wasn't sure. I went to a career coach. She mentioned being an architect. That was never going to work for me. I wasn't going back to school. And then ultimately there was a position that opened up as a solution engineer at our company, and I took that on. It was a very technical role as far as we were selling hardware, and we were doing some other stuff with the solution consultants there. But ultimately, I ended up being able to go into a role at Trella Health where we are demoing products, and I was very much focused on the healthcare world, and I knew that that was where I wanted to go. And so I was really only looking at healthcare IT when I was trying to find my next career choice. And so now I've been here for 2 years, and it's been absolutely wonderful.
Okay. All right. Way too many questions. For the uneducated, EHR and EMR, what do they stand for?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I apologize. I kind of live and breathe in this world. But
Right.
yeah, so EHR stands for Electronic Health Record. And it is a world that kind of resides specifically within all these healthcare spaces as far as provider offices go. So hospitals, physician offices, even if you're walking into like what Trella Health does, where home health and hospice agencies and things like that, they have software where they keep your records. And it's a very complicated world to live in because of all the rules, HIPAA regulations. There's other compliances that are required for some of this stuff. And ultimately, when you're looking at large health systems and things like that, you have to have a lot of these things. So it's a fairly complicated world with a lot of different solutions as well. So like patient portals, prescription management, all that stuff. But that's what EHR really means.
So for that specific one, were you selling to the IT or to the like owners of family practices and stuff like that?
So when I was in that role, I was selling to the owners of family practices. And so oftentimes they would have outsourced IT folks that they would work with. If they were large enough, they may have their own IT that they were working with as well. But
so
yeah,
in the end, it's IT. And like the people who know what they're talking about are the IT. The people who are paying are potentially the owners. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you weren't a great account manager.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't have, like, you were young. The major reason I heard is because you couldn't have the hard conversations, which is a major part of sales. And I think a little more now as sales engineers as well. How do you feel about having the hard conversations now that you're an SE leader?
I don't know if it's anything that I'd ever, get over per se, but I will say this. I thrive when I'm more confident in what I'm doing and what I know. And I think at the time I was just very young. I did not get a business degree, as we kind of discussed. And so I'd never practiced any of this stuff before. And so when I was getting on the phone, and I remember making my first sales calls to folks and having to talk the talk. And it was just, whew, I mean, I think we all can kind of relate to being
Yes.
brand new in a space and not knowing what the heck is going on. And that's kind of what I felt. When I think about it now, I feel, I feel like I've come a very long way in my 7, 8 years, but it doesn't feel like there was any one moment that everything clicked. It's just at some point I became a lot more confident and I focused on what I knew. I was listening to a podcast, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago now, where they were talking about take the 10% of the job that you love and figure out how to make it 40 or 50% or 80 or 90%. And what I loved was talking to these people and ultimately educating them on what was called, it was a more specific part of healthcare called accountable care organizations. And it was this value-based care entity thing. And so that's what I loved. And ultimately, that's how I ended up getting the job at Trella. And now, having the conversation is easier when you have the facts and the data to kind of back you up too.
So it sounds like you became a account manager or account executive. We're not given any training, or maybe you've given training, but you didn't have any practice to do the job.
So it was six weeks of training
Yeah.
that they gave us, or maybe it was 8 weeks. And honestly, they did set me up for success.
Right.
I
Okay.
just think, there was this part of me at the time that, and I talk about this to a lot of people because I struggle with why I didn't do well in that role. I really thought they did set me up for success, and I really thought I was going to be successful as a salesperson. But ultimately, I think a lot of it was just me not feeling inspired enough to kind of put in the time and the effort and be able to execute on some of the more strategic products that we were selling. I think for me at the time, I was trying to grab whatever I could because I knew I wasn't meeting quota and I knew things weren't going well. And so I did not feel confident at all in what I was doing. And so
Okay.
I think people perform well when they feel good. And I'm a very strong believer in that. And I did not feel good about what I was
I'm
doing.
gonna play devil's advocate. I don't know who the devil is in this situation, but I'm gonna basically counter what you're saying. So let me just ask you this: you first off, I didn't know what bassoon was until I just searched it up.
No, yeah,
It's it looks interesting. At least I haven't heard it. But when did you start playing the bassoon?
I was in middle school.
Middle school, and then you
Mhm.
went to university and you studied you to be a bassoonist.
Yep.
Okay. And then when you went and you worked at the orchestra, were you were you just performing or did you have practice time as well?
Oh yeah, we were practicing. I mean, there's no way you can kind of get into that world without
Okay.
practicing hours every day.
Okay. So I'm not saying sales is the same as being a bassoonist, but would you have been able to perform at an orchestra if you were given 6 weeks of training only?
That's a good question. No, absolutely not. So
Okay.
I think that's a really great point.
Yeah, so and that's the thing, like we are given training as SEs or as salespeople. But like I think of sales engineering and sales in general as a sports in the business world. Right? We perform more than we practice, whereas every other sport or every other like musician practices way more than they perform.
Yep.
So how can one feel confident about what they do if all they're doing is mistakes, especially in the first
Yeah.
like first few weeks
Well,
of their career?
I think it's an interesting point. The thing I would add to that, and the reason that I started, really doubting myself in the sales role was because there were other folks, that were coming into this and immediately finding success. Now, maybe they were business majors in college, and a lot of them were, and I know that. And I absolutely do not want to discredit them at all. I think they were great sales reps. But sometimes, I think these folks that come in and just have this, I do think
Yep.
there's always this innate quality to sales reps.
Yep.
I respect the heck out of them, and it's
Yep.
oftentimes they come to me and they thank me for what I'm doing, but to me, there's no way I could do, and I shouldn't say it like that. If I had to, such as the situation you were put into, would I take up that challenge? Absolutely, I'd give it another shot. but there were other folks coming in and immediately performing better than me. And I could not figure out what the secret ingredient was that I was missing,
Right.
which was really frustrating.
Yeah. No, I agree. I hate the fact that I respect salespeople so much now that I'm a part of it. So I get it. And I talk to a lot of SEs who complain about their salespeople, like, and they think just like, I can do their job better. But there are so many conversations that happen behind the scenes that SEs are not involved in and don't see, and
Yeah,
negotiation
exactly.
and getting
Absolutely.
yelled at for something being late, like especially with hardware
Mhm.
or early. It's like where they get mad at us if it's late, they get mad at us if it's early. Anyways, a million things happen.
Yeah.
So okay, but before you became an account executive, according to this, and you mentioned this, you were an inside sales associate. What does that mean?
I was just supporting the account executive. So truly that was the role I was hired for. And it's a training role. So there was, when you talk about like the training to get into the sales role, a lot of folks were in that role at Greenway for about 6 months. And
Okay.
so ultimately I'd gotten the recommendation from our trainers at Greenway to say, hey, listen, if a position to open up, he could hop in and he could take that over. They were very, very confident in that.
Okay.
And I appreciated it. It didn't turn
Yeah.
out quite the way I expected it to, but it was a great learning experience for me.
Is that equivalent to like an SDR job, sales development representative job, or is it different?
Not quite.
Okay.
So essentially, when we were at Greenway, there are a lot of products that we're selling. Us, and as I'm sure you're aware, some make more money than others.
Yeah.
What my job was to handle all those products that don't really make a
Okay.
lot of money, but the account executive still had to sell them. So I
Yeah.
was basically an order taker. I was creating the
Okay.
proposals, sending them out, getting all that signed, and then going into their name.
Okay. And when you were an account executive, I feel like sometimes as individuals, we're a lot harder on ourselves than somebody else. What feedback did you get from your management team while you were an account executive?
Oftentimes in my performance reviews, I think, it boiled down to you've got the pieces of the puzzle, but you're just having trouble fitting them together.
Yeah.
And I did get a lot of feedback kind of around that. And I think probably my past managers would agree with that. Um, they were very helpful people. The previous managers, I mean, and my team around me was very helpful. We sat, and this is something I miss to this day. We sat in rows of four and we were kind of facing each other. So there were 8 of us on a team and we often would collaborate. We had a great time doing that. And definitely some of my fondest memories at work, but I think overall, even with the support and with the encouragement of my management and things like that, they knew I had the capabilities to do things, and I was smart enough to take some of this on. But I do think, when it came to the execution of it, those are the things we always focused on.
Okay. All right. And I love the fact, like, was it your coach or a book you read who said that you try to find 10% that you like and make it 40? Who is it who
It
said
was a
that?
podcast. I went on a fairly
Podcast.
deep
Fuck.
I went on a fairly deep search trying to figure out what the heck I wanted to do with my life when
Yeah.
sales wasn't working out. And I was very candid and open with the folks around me, my manager at the time and things like that, because they knew, I just wanted to be better at what I was doing. And so I mentioned I went to a career coach and everything, and I listened to all these podcasts and I was trying to put all the pieces together. And I couldn't figure it out. Couldn't figure it out until I landed an SE role. And then I really got into that.
So you didn't know that the SE role would be a perfect fit, but you tried it. Is that what I just heard?
No, that's exactly right. I gave it a
Okay.
year.
Okay.
I gave it a year because there were 2 types of solutions consultants at Greenway. There were the product focused ones who were demoing the product, and then there was myself and my boss. We were a team of 2, and we were selling hardware, and more so than that, infrastructure for these systems, whether they're larger physician groups and things like that. And so my boss was very knowledgeable in all that. I had no clue what I was doing when I got into that.
Okay. All right. How did you figure out that the 10% that you loved about your job is talking to people and helping them?
So I mentioned there's this thing called accountable care organizations in the healthcare world, and it would take me probably 5 or 10 minutes to explain it. Probably not worth our time, but ultimately, it's this program where we're trying to change the healthcare payment model, and I was very passionate about it. And so I spent a lot of time as a sales rep, not even as an SE, as a sales rep, setting up time to speak with all of my customers and even some of my colleagues' customers around the benefits of this program, and not just the benefits, because a lot of them were going to be included in whether they wanted to be or not, but really starting to look at where they needed to put some of their efforts to perform well on some of this stuff and ultimately increase some of the payments they were getting. So I was very much focused on presenting to customers. And that was probably the beginning of like, understanding what an actual product demo might look like, or where I wanted to go. And so I knew I liked that.
Okay.
And that's really where I started to change my mindset.
You're one of the first people who's telling me openly on the podcast that you didn't like a certain job. And I talk about me not liking my current job often, and my boss knows it. So it's no secret. But like, from your perspective, how did it feel being in a job that you didn't like and you didn't feel you're as good as you could be or you should be at a job?
Well, I should be clear. I did like my job. What I didn't like was that I was not performing well and I couldn't figure out where I was missing the mark.
Okay.
Blame it on hard work, blame it on, and because we know it's not a fair deal, right? You could have a great sales rep who can go in and make 5 calls and close quota, get above quota, whatever, and they're just so good at that. And there's the next person 2 rows over, maybe me, had to make 20 calls to get the same sort of, or to make the same amount of money, essentially, to sell the same amount. And so that's just the nature of sales in general. So I should be clear, I really did enjoy my job. What I did not enjoy was that I was not good at it, or that I was not the number one performer.
Okay. All right. And then you made the switch to sales engineering. How did your view change has your view changed about sales since you become a sales engineer? And do you feel, well, let's just stop there. How has your view changed about sales since you become a sales engineer?
Do I think I could do maybe a better job than I did in the past? Yes. But is it something that truly interests me to go back to? I should, one other thing that I think a lot of great sales reps are is very motivated by money. And while I'm motivated by a high paycheck and things like that, there was this lack of, that wasn't the main motivator for me, I should say.
Yep.
I don't know if I would ever choose to go back into it. There might be an opportunity where I need to, but I don't know that I would choose to go back into it, because I think one of the things that I did not like about sales is really almost the project management aspect of it. You are taking this from beginning to end. You are pulling the pieces together, the players, whether it's internal or whether it's the prospects. You are following up with emails and everything else, or phone calls, or even in-person meetings and setting it. There's a lot of that doesn't really speak to, I think, my inherent nature, which is really the performance piece. And there's a lot that goes into being an SC as well, but that's one thing that the demos I love. I love them. I especially love when I get time to prep for them and they turn out well. So
It's interesting that you say about the project management. Like, project management is fun, but I find the problem with sales in general is that we have a million projects on the go at the same time, and each one has a million moving parts with a million different people. Like, generally speaking, with the project, you have identified this person will do this person will do that. With sales, you're kind of figuring it out on the fly, and you're following up a million times to make sure that it gets done. So yeah, I see what you're saying there. Okay, so you've been in basically health IT since basically 2015.
Yeah, pretty much.
This is a question I don't know if you're going to be able to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways, and we'll see where it takes us. What is the difference between health IT and any other IT?
Well, when I think about, I'm trying to think about whether I want to answer this from the SE perspective or whether I want to answer it just from the overall industry perspective. Obviously, when I'm thinking about health IT, you are going to have solutions and software that is geared towards healthcare. Now, that can take a million different forms. So, a lot of the apps that are being created, they may just have one little, twinge that kind of ticks it towards the box of healthcare, and then it becomes sort of health IT. The biggest difference that I think when I'm thinking about like an SE for health IT, or when I'm thinking about software for health IT, you have got to have people that know the healthcare industry in that company.
Okay.
It is an incredibly nuanced industry. I mean, obviously, billion-trillion-dollar industry within the US, right? And you've got Medicare, and you've got commercial payers, and you've got all different types of entities that fall under this massive umbrella within healthcare in the United States. And if you don't understand how that operates, if you don't understand the changes, and you don't have to understand the whole thing, but you better understand, your aspect of it. You can't be a healthcare IT company. It's just, that's why you see a lot of these healthcare IT companies, they will have a chief medical officer on staff who was a doctor or a nurse at some point in their life, and then ultimately decided they liked the technology space of it. And they inform so many decisions around, what they want, where they want the product to go, or where it should go based on their network and everything else. So that's really, that's the key difference for me when I'm thinking about it. It's same as IT, but you're just incorporating the healthcare
Right.
industry. And I know it seems like a simple answer, but that
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm trying to see where it fits. Like, generally speaking, most companies have their IT department.
Yeah.
So there's IT, and then a health IT, I guess, is like sits on the infrastructure that the I guess regular IT creates. Am I thinking about this right, or do you have your own infrastructure that you sell to?
Well, health IT, it can be hardware related and infrastructure related in that regard. From the way that I think about it is we're really just, it's this branch of IT where we're just focused on healthcare applications,
Okay.
software, things like that. So,
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be one way or the other. I just think that's truly just the way I think about it.
Yeah. So basically, even like in a health organization, IT is going to have a firewall. It might have some SIEM switches and all that, servers to run software or in the cloud, whatever, and you fit within that aspect.
I mean,
Okay.
the probably the best way to explain is like from the EHR, the electronic health record perspective. We're building all this software that is health related, but then it sits on, those regular IT applications. We still need all those to help support all that stuff. Firewalls and everything else becomes incredibly important.
So you kind of need, from a knowledge perspective, you need to know technology, but you also need to know healthcare. So it's not just healthcare that you're learning.
Yeah, you know what? I will say it is very dependent on the industry or the company that you're a part of. So I mentioned at Greenway, we had two different types of SEs. We had the ones that were focused on the product, and then we had the ones that were focused on infrastructure, databases, that sort of thing.
Right.
I will tell you at Trella, and a lot of other healthcare kind of vendors do operate this way. The requirements of an SE are very different from, maybe Salesforce or Jira or anything like that, where you're looking more at a technology platform like that. And I'm in the midst of a hiring process right now, so I think this has become very clear to me as I've been working with recruiters and interviewees and things like that. As we think of SEs as these very technical people, and they should be. In my case, where I need your technical capability is to understand the healthcare industry, because specifically at Trella, what we're doing is we're taking these data metrics for post-acute agencies, or our one of our solutions is very data driven and metric based, and I need you to be able to relate that to the prospect, to the audience, and help them understand why it's important. And if you don't understand the healthcare industry and the nuances behind it, you're going to have a really difficult time doing that. And our solutions consultants at Greenway, very similar. They understood the healthcare industry because they've been a part of it for so long and they were interested in it. And it's being able to take that and then showcase it to the prospect or things like that. So when I'm interviewing people, I'm not worried about if they understand the architecture with which our platform sits on. I want them to be able to understand the product, the value props behind where the healthcare industry comes in and how we can help them achieve whatever goal they're trying to achieve.
Okay.
So
you mentioned that some companies have chief medical officers. Have you looked at
Mhm.
hiring like nurses as sales engineers? I don't know if it's valid in any way. Just a thought that popped up.
It's a good question, and I don't, it is certainly not outside of the realm of
Okay,
possibility. However, it does help to understand the sales process.
right.
I think that's a big part of it, to understand how SaaS companies operate as well. So would never, I mean, I think, honestly, it would be something that would be really beneficial. And I've seen a lot of nurses and clinical folks achieve a lot of success when they come over to these SaaS companies.
Okay,
Um, I do think there is still a technical component of this, understanding for one specific thing that I'll call out that, talks to some of the technical components of this, are what we consider integrations between electronic health records and maybe our own platforms. But there's this idea within healthcare right now of interoperability and being able to share patient records across all these different platforms, for patient access mostly. Patients, for a long time, you had to go and talk to your doctor and have your records scanned, and then they'd have to fax them to you, or you had to drop by the office to pick them up. But when we give patients access to their own records, and not only just patients, but when we give hospitals that have the same, or even have different software that they're using, different hospital systems all receiving patient information. So for instance, if I'm a hospital in New York, but you're traveling out to LA to go, on a bachelor party or something, and you end up in the hospital, they don't have any patient records on you. There's no way for them to get them until recently, where we started to look at health information exchanges and things like that, where we are now sharing these records. And so that's part of what I want them to understand. And so from, not to suggest at all that an RN could not come in and have a lot of that knowledge. But I just want to make sure that they still do have some of that technical capability, but also understand how it relates to the healthcare industry.
Okay, that's fair. And going back to you, you were a sales engineer. You've been a sales engineer for a while, and I guess recently you took on the challenge of becoming an SE manager. Um, one, why did you say yes to that challenge? Well, I guess that's it. Why did you say yes to that challenge, and how has it been since then?
We have a very small SE team at Trella Health. It's fairly new as well. So not to name drop too much, but the original SE here, her name is Mimi. She started really just, I think she kind of cemented the fact that there's a need for solution engineers within our company. And so ultimately they brought on 2 more folks. And so we really kind of, when we're at full capacity, we're just a team of 3. And I think maybe something that's different from other SE roles is that we actually kind of fall under product management. And it really helps. I would absolutely recommend it, because it really helps us stay as close to the product as possible. We may not have a lot of opinions one way or the other when we're doing roadmap reviews and things like that. I usually tend to stay more in the background, but it helps me to be able to digest all that information. So when my boss, Rebecca, asked me to kind of take that on, what she was really just trying to do was, number one, layer the organization a little bit as we try and think about how we want to move forward our business. Trella follows the principles of scaling up, which is the Rockefeller habits, if you're familiar with that at all. And so ultimately, that's just kind of one of the really big principles within scaling up, is to kind of have those layers within the organization. So at this point, I'm a player coach. I would love to stay in that role because I really enjoy the demoing aspect of this, but I also love sharing my passion around, the performance aspect of all this, and also the healthcare industry in general. I do feel very strongly that there are some really key things we can do at Trella, but at other healthcare IT companies, to change the way healthcare operates. And so I love being able to share that with folks. And so those are just a few of the reasons I decided to take it on. I've never been a manager before, so this is a new challenge for me, and something that I'm really excited to try and figure out too.
You've been doing this for like 4 months now, 5 months, something like that.
Yeah, I guess time flies a little bit, but
Okay,
yeah.
so here's the most general question ever: how's it been going?
So we're a smaller company. So we, what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to say really is that we don't have all the training resources of a large Silicon Valley company or something like that. And so mostly what I've been trying to do at this point is just kind of read and digest the knowledge in there. I've got a million different books over there that I've started. Some of them I've finished, some of them I haven't. I just got, I don't know if you've seen it, The Social Sales Engineer.
Yeah, I've read it.
You
I
read
know
it? Okay,
Patrick.
yeah,
Yeah, I know Patrick's been on the podcast a couple of times.
oh, no way. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm in the midst of that right now.
nice.
Really interesting read, not necessarily management related, but just from a personal development standpoint, I think it's great to read. What's funny is I just think this is hilarious because when you'd mentioned that I'd been on 1 minute late to and for those not watching, I was 1 minute late to the podcast. But when they talk about the character in that book, and he always chooses to show up right on time to the meetings, and they talk about like his just the demeanor or the energy that brings. And so I was just thinking about that when you said it. I was like, oh man, I should have showed up early. But anyways,
No, it's
um
it's
yeah,
good. Well, that's what happens in the Zoom world or whatever. It's like every time I have to like for example, Google Meets, my camera never works.
yeah,
Right?
I
WebEx
know.
I always need to update something. There's always something that happens. So
Always.
yeah, yeah, I get that. No worries.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I mean, beyond that, I'm just trying to stay afloat a little bit. This is something that is very new for me. And so I'm really enjoying the challenge so far, where, like I mentioned, we're in the middle of the hiring process right now. And I tell you what, nothing like learning, by just doing it. I'm a strong believer in doing it and then learning that way. And so ultimately, yeah, that's, I haven't gotten a ton of time to, figure out that managing side of it. So it is, I mean, it is just trying to do it, trying to find the opportunities to do more interviews, to give feedback and things like that I'm really just in the midst of right now.
Okay, nice. Speaking of the scaling up, I didn't know what it was, so I just searched it on Google, and now I have something to read while the
Yeah,
kids
there
are
you
at
go.
jiu-jitsu. So
It's
thank
very
you for
much
that.
geared towards entrepreneurship and just how to scale your business. And so they ultimately that's kind of the model Trella is trying to follow, but they've been trying to educate a lot of us in the company on it. So we all kind of have one vision moving forward. And that's
Nice.
something I've really enjoyed about Trella, just the transparency around that.
That's pretty cool. I think of every human being as their own business, so hopefully that'll be useful for people, individuals as well. I'll read it. I have no idea. I'm just guesstimating. But
Yeah.
so, Josh, I can talk to you for hours, but I think we're almost at the end of our time. Was there a question you were hoping I was going to ask you, but I did not?
No, honestly, I think when I think about just being an SE, a lot of it for me, the things that I wanted to share are the art of the performance, the art of storytelling, as you mentioned, one of your other guests was talking about, and being able to take these technical concepts and put them in a way that really inspires people. I think I almost approach it like a keynote, I think, in some way where I really want people to come away and feel differently than they did when they logged on to see, the initial demo. And I know there's a lot of other parts to being a sales or a solution engineer. We do RFPs and that sort of thing. But I think that is such a kind of key component of the human experience as it relates to being a solution engineer, which sounds a little cheesy, but that's kind of how I feel about it. So I
Yeah,
appreciate that you asked those questions. It's really at the heart of what I think is important about this role.
it's my pleasure. And the worst feeling in the world is to see people fall asleep during your demo. So,
Ah,
like,
yeah.
it's always good for them to like come out happy at the end. All right, so Josh, I'm gonna move on to the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions I ask almost
Yep.
every guest, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I think you already answered the first one, but let me run it by you again, see if your answer changes. What do you love about sales engineering? Demoing, but
Oh man,
other
yeah,
than
no. So
demo,
I probably should have saved this then for that moment,
no,
but
it's all
truly,
good.
yeah, no, it is the art of the performance. I mean, it's the key thing that I take away from my music career, and it's the key thing that drives me. Like when I think I still get nervous before going on demos, and I think any I shouldn't say any person that's good at that does, because ultimately everybody feels different. There's a million ways to tackle something, but I still get nervous on these because I want to put on, the performance of a lifetime. As silly as that sounds, it's truly like the way I feel about it. And so being able to get on, being able to, well, that there's that part of it, but then there's the collaboration too. It's similar to working with an orchestra. I'm working with my sales reps, and I'm working with customer success, and I'm working with the integrations team and whoever else to create this beautiful piece of music that is ultimately what the customer wants to purchase. And so that's how I relate it a lot. That's what I love about the role more than anything else.
That's pretty good. I love that. So the second question is, what do you believe is your superpower?
What do I believe is my superpower? I might say that I don't know that I have a superpower. I think, well, you know what? I'm going to say that, but then ultimately, where I think like my strength lies, um, is just being able to be a human. I think with people. I mean, that's I know I keep saying the word cheesy here, but
No, that's
where
good.
I think about like these demos can go off the rails is when people stop focusing on what's going on in the room and start focusing on the product, or just keep going through. And I think yeah, I just want to be there for the team, and I want to be like I mentioned too, I want to be number one. Like there's a strong aspect of pride that comes with that.
Yeah.
So and it whatever it takes, man. I don't know.
Okay.
That's a tough question to answer. That's a really tough one.
Well, sorry. I'll reframe it in a second. But for what I heard is, well, your superpower is one, being human, and two, your competitiveness. But let me reframe the question in such a way: if you were to put yourself in your manager's shoes, and they're giving you feedback about your strengths, would they be the same or would they be different from their perspective?
I think maybe my manager would probably talk about my openness and willing to admit um, what I don't know. And
Yeah.
when we talk about it a little bit too, I think it does go along with being human. I think to an extent, um, I believe that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the smartest, or to be the one that's gonna, end up breaking through the glass ceiling, whatever it is. And so ultimately, I absolutely adore my boss. I think she's such a human as well, and I think that is truly her superpower. So maybe I'm just like taking what I see in her and trying to emulate it onto myself. But yeah, I think there's this empathy that is absolutely required to get on people's level, and so hopefully I think she would see the same thing in myself.
Nice. I like all these answers. I don't think there's a wrong answer, but I really like all these answers.
Yeah,
All
it's
right, so
just
go ahead.
no, that's all good. I don't have
Okay.
any.
So the third question is: you mentioned that you're already reading the Social Sales Engineer. In that pile of books that you have, which one would you recommend people start with if they want to be SEs, or if they want to become SE leaders?
If they want to be an SE or become an SE leader. Um, all right. So I've read, let me think about some of the books I read. Great Demo. I've read what was the other one? Demo to Win. Um, I think one book, just looking at these now here, one book that I did just pick up, just at the, my manager had recommended it. So it's kind of my most recent read here that I did think about quite a bit, and I really did enjoy. This was called The 1 Minute Manager.
Okay.
And it's very simple, I think, to an extent, but at the same time, the 1 Minute Manager is really just about kind of getting a little bit of time back in your day, because you're trying to set people on the right path, I think, as a manager. And what I'd like to do, I was listening to a keynote the other day, and they even said that the word manager is so out of date. And coach really is just kind of the place that I want to be at. And I don't know that I know quite how to do that yet, but I think reading some of these books is just very helpful in trying to figure out where I want to go next as far as management is concerned. Trying to think about any others,
While you're thinking, may I give recommendations?
Yeah, sure.
if you haven't read them yet. Are you familiar with John Kerr?
I don't know that I am.
So he's the author of Mastering Technical Sales, which I call the SE Bible. He doesn't like that title, but I don't care. That's what I call it. He can live with it. So that's what the Mastering Technical Sales is, a great SE book to begin with. But he wrote a book specifically for sales engineer managers, and it's called the SE Manager Handbook. And I think that's a great book that kind of outlines what you should be doing as an SE leader.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And he's been doing this for a long time. And the second book I would recommend is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. All right, if you're not familiar with Jocko Willink, he's a Navy SEAL, and he was a commander, and he basically took all the experiences
Oh yeah,
he learned.
you know what? I had been recommended that book before by one of our sales reps here, who is such a great storyteller. And yeah, I have heard that before.
So I would recommend that in audiobook if you can get it, because he reads it along with another SEAL team member of his, and just listening to them read the book makes you feel like a Navy SEAL. You won't be a Navy SEAL, but at least it makes you feel like one. So I would recommend these two books as well for SE managers. But yeah, you were thinking of another one to share, or?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at my bookshelf. I think most of my books are out there, and it's difficult for me to kind of think about it. I don't know where my books are at this point. We're in the middle, so candidly speaking, my wife is pregnant, and so this is not going to be my office for much longer. So we're like in the process of moving everything right now. I think one of the things too, I mean, this isn't necessarily the whole book, but Reading Great Demo was one. We did a book club on it here at Trella with the SEs here. And the one thing that I would just, I took away from that, and there's a lot of different things you can take away, but is just that really framed the way that I'm giving my demos now around when you have an interesting feature that you want to show, or something that really is just going to wow the audience, don't wait to show it at the end of a demo. Get in there and please show it, because people will lose interest. And then 30 minutes later, you'll be getting to that point, and people will have already lost interest. So that's one thing that I was just thinking about when you asked the question. But
no, that's pretty good. There's a gentleman, I don't remember his name, but he was one of the co-founders of Reprise, and he talked about the concept of 2 clicks to wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I love that. All right, I guess last question of the not so fire round. Congratulations again, by the way, on the baby. Is there a habit you're working on today to improve in your personal or professional life?
Yes, multiple different habits, but I think the habit that I would probably go with first is really diving into feedback culture. I mentioned I take a lot of pride in what I do, and I want to be number one. And I think ultimately a lot of times when you're trying to take on that mantle and be in that role, feedback can be tough to swallow. And so I'm trying to not only be better at swallowing feedback and taking that and really acting on it, but then ultimately thinking about other folks too. And because what was I reading? Radical Candor recently. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read that.
I have not, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think they say in there, like, the truth will set you free and something like that. I'm not sure I totally believe that, but what I do believe is that you are doing people a disservice if you are not honest with them. And it doesn't have to be all the time, but you really, and this is something I'm struggling with, and I think as a manager I absolutely need to get better at, is people want to grow. People want to be better than they were yesterday. Generally, they want to be. Yep. And so for me, it's really important that I work on that to become somebody that is better at giving feedback and is willing to give it, and also better at swallowing it too.
Yeah, that is very difficult. My wife tells me that all the time anyways. So, all right. So Josh, it's been great talking to you. Again, I could talk to you all day. If people want to connect with you, where can they do that?
I don't typically post much on social media, so LinkedIn would probably be a pretty good start. I know I just said I'm reading The Social Sales Engineer, so I feel like I'm going through cardinal sin or something right now, but LinkedIn is probably the best place. And honestly, feel free to reach out. I don't know if any of my advice kind of sinks in for anybody out there, but if it does, or if you've had a similar experience, if you're a musician, if you're an RN, if you're whatever, and you just want to talk, I'm happy to always have a conversation. So yeah, I mean, that's it for now. And I would say LinkedIn for sure.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for your time, Josh. I know you said you're reading a lot of books. I have a confession. I haven't had time. I've been struggling to read one book for the last 6 months. So I'm giving
Listen,
people
it
permission
is something
not.
I've had to work on too,
Yeah.
as well. You know, I think I probably, once I graduated high school, I took a 10-year hiatus from reading.
Yeah.
But I try.
So thank you so much for your time again, Josh. And
Yeah,
talk to
thank
you
you,
soon.
Ramsey. All right.
All right, that's the end of the show. Thank you, Josh, for coming on. This was great. I hope you took something out of this call, this interview, as much as I did. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was good to dig in and understand like the difference between health IT, regular IT. Are they separate? Do they work together? How does it work? Who buys? What is needed? What are the skills? Because it's different from what I do. And if you're interested in the health world, you might want to check this podcast out, which is odd that I'm saying it after the podcast is done. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If you do need help, if you're looking to become a better SE, if you're looking to become an SE to begin with, check out the SE hotline, reach out to me, connect with me, and I'll be happy to chat and help you out with that. So I'll leave it at that. With that, I'm signing off. Cheers.